Kurt, what's up, man? Welcome to the podcast, brother.
Well, thank you, Larry. Appreciate it, buddy.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to have you on. Not only, obviously are you a member of Dad Edge Accelerator, but we're also in each other's backyard, like almost literally, right? So
Yeah.
both of us from St. Louis and know a lot of mutual people, but I'm excited to have you on, man. I'm excited for you to share your journey with the audience because it's very meaningful and it's really, really powerful. But what I really want to get started with here is you had a life altering event that happened to you uh, several months ago that was unexpected. Let's start there.
All right. Well, I woke up on Mother's Day and my wife started to talk to me. And as I responded, I sounded like a hearing impaired person. And she started to freak out. And she says, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And so I hopped out of bed and I went and I splashed my face, tried to talk again, and it was a slurred mess. I couldn't get out what I wanted to say. And I knew right away I was having a stroke. And she started saying, "I think you're having a stroke." And I said, "I am. Uh, call 911, get somebody out here." I had woke up a couple hours earlier in the night with a real bad headache had turned over. So we think that's perhaps at that point I had had the stroke. And it would come and go, my ability to speak and all that. And I went to the hospital and it was touch and go. And they're kind of telling you, "Hey, we can give you this and this could cause you to bleed to death. Or if you don't take it, you'll probably have a more major stroke. And it could either do a lot more damage or kill you. So you have two choices: do this and maybe die, or do this and maybe die." So it was really, it was a touch and go. And the thing of it is, I'm an extremely healthy individual. And through this all, find out just how healthy I truly am. I've had suspicions about whether something might be wrong here and there, but zero cholesterol and very flexible arteries. It was due to a injury that I had received to my right carotid front artery
Oh my
that
God.
had closed off. It caused a flap to open up on the inside of my artery and close off. So it's kind of more of a fluke incident that created the problem and caused the stroke. But other than that, I'm very healthy.
So yeah, it's interesting because obviously you've been doing life with us for quite some time. I didn't know if you had had a history of hyperlipidemia or if this was something that, but it sounds like it was a lot like Mark Ewing, who's also a part of Accelerator, who came on the podcast just about a month ago and talked about his journey. And he's only in his early 40s, but how you look like to me that you've made almost virtually a full recovery. Is that accurate?
Um, to some degree, I still have lost feeling in my three fingers on the outside of my left hand. I can't always tell what I'm touching or what I'm doing. For the most part, it's not quite a full recovery because mentally, what takes place in your brain, I had some brain cell damage, but what takes place in the brain, it takes quite a while to heal. So I can tell when I go through a high emotional time or something that's very stressful, and that's also why this Dad Accelerator group was so important to me, because of the struggle that I was having trying to recover because of the stress that there was in my personal life, my personal anxiety, and in my relationship. And I knew I had to do something because I was at my wit's end, and I was having trouble recovering because of it.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of the things that were going on. Obviously, outside of even the stroke.
Well, I'm in the insurance business and a life insurance agent, and it has a very high stress level to it. A lot of hours, late night hours, and I think I've pretty much had a difficult time most of my life dealing with anxiety. I work a lot. I would concentrate. I think a lot of my self-esteem came from my job and how successful I was or how well I did. And that was more important to me in younger years than what it is as I get older. I began to realize that life has a lot more important things to it than just work. And that the things I needed to have been concentrating on, I wasn't concentrating on. And boy, I tell you, I wished I had found the Dad Alliance 30 years ago. When I was raising my sons, I was looking for something to help me with my anxiety and also with my marriage. And I knew of your podcast, but I thought it was for dads only. That I thought it was about dads that were raising kids, and yet after having just kind of reached out to you because you made a comment on something I noted in Facebook. And I said, hey, do you know more about this? And you said, yeah, I interviewed this guy. And it was from the Black Belt Husband. And I was looking at getting the book and stuff. And that's just kind of sparked the conversation where I realized that the Dad's Edge covered so much more than just being a dad. It's about personal development. I needed to do something different with myself. And I knew that the struggles that I was going through, not only personally, but also in the marriage, there was one common denominator, and that was me and how I handled things. And there was only one thing I could do, and that was work on myself. I could not change how my wife responded, but I could change how I responded to my wife. I could change how I viewed things. And something that kind of took me down that journey is I heard this thing on Facebook. This one guy said, hey, an infomercial came on for another type of program. And he said, does your wife tell you that you're emotionally unavailable and that she doesn't feel safe and that she doesn't feel like she can tell you anything and that she can't talk to you, that you don't listen, that you're not present? Brother, if that's you, it's because it's 100% your fault. And I thought, whoa, man, that kind of socked me right between the eyes. But I began to think, he said, the only person that you can change is you. You have to be the change maker. When you are the change maker, it changes your family. It'll change your wife. It'll change your children. It changes everything. And that follows along with the biblical background that I have, that I've been raised with, that it does start. It doesn't mean that as a husband, you lord over your family and you're the boss of your wife and things that I don't have that kind of mentality. But still, as a man, you're to lead. And when you lead and lead with confidence, your family and your wife will follow. And those are things I kind of always knew, but I didn't really know how to implement those changes that I needed to make in myself. And that's where the biggest struggle came in. Is I read books, I hear podcasts, I listen to things, but my biggest problem was implementation and the right steps to take. And that's where the Dad Edge has made all the difference for me. I can now read a book, but it's books that you guys recommend. But from that, I can glean from it, because then I can talk to you about it and you help me implement those strategies that it talks about, that even though I read it, I didn't really comprehend how to apply it. And boy, just the open conversations that we have in those 1 hour meetings a couple of times a week, where you can just come on and ask any kind of questions you want to ask. Oh my gosh, I learned so much from just hearing other struggles that other men are going through, that it gives me the aha moments of, I need to implement that in my life and in my marriage. And it's, even though maybe it's not as much one-on-one coaching, it is, but it isn't. But in a way, it works better, because I'm learning so much more from all the other experiences the other men are having, and the explanation or the strategies and help that you give to those men, that I can then turn around and apply those same principles to me, because I'm constantly finding things in every one of these meetings that applies to my situation.
Man, oh man. I'm going to go I'm going to go somewhere with all this. So question I have for you is, if you were to advise men on, when it comes to your marriage, when it comes to how you go about life, is it better to rely on your feelings or your skills?
It's skills all the way. My feelings is what messed up everything.
Interesting.
My feelings is what created so much anxiety for me. And then constantly replaying the stuff in your mind over and over.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I want to, and by the way, I love everything you just said, and even the way you said it. There's so much ownership in the words that you've chosen to use and in your voice tone. I can feel it. The audience can feel it. So I want to honor you first and foremost for that. But let's normalize this whole thing about how we don't know exactly what to do in marriage. And we love our wives, we love our kids. There's a lot of emotion that's associated when it comes to those relationships. Those are the most intimate, most important relationships we will ever have in our life. Let me normalize this whole thing. Gentlemen, you in the audience, and Kurt, you too, and me too. I'm going to let y'all off the hook right now. If you don't know the skills in marriage, how to connect with your wife, how to communicate with her by using emotional labels, by mirroring her, by voice tone, generative questions, creating an environment of psychological safety. And that's just a handful of skills that we teach. That's really okay. It's not your fault if you don't know them. It is your fault if you don't learn them. That's what I will say. But let me normalize this by saying this. I don't know anything about the life insurance industry. Nothing. Now I could be super passionate about it, right? Like super passionate. I'm like, oh, I love the life insurance industry because it's such a value add to people, because in the case of an emergency, if a loved one passes away, the people that person leaves behind, they're going to be taken care of. What better way to take care of families than to obviously present them with a value of life insurance, right? Now, that's one way to look at it. I could be super passionate about it, but that does not mean that I'm going to be really good at talking my customers, my potential customers through what that even looks like. I don't even know the ins and outs of life insurance. I know I have a policy. I know if I die, how much my family will get. That's it. I do not know the intricacies whatsoever. And I sure as hell don't even know how to explain it. Here's the other thing I'll explain too. Think about our jobs for a moment. When I graduated from college, I got my first job in pharmaceutical sales. Now, I had a degree in health management with a minor in nutrition. So I was more on the, pills and medication is more for people who obviously, they need something when they're dealing with a health crisis or thereafter, right? Everything that I learned in college was more preventative wellness type of a situation. So when it came to medication, I was like, no clue. When I got my first gig in pharmaceutical sales, I had to do 3 weeks of home study, then tests. Then they sent me away for 3 weeks to New Jersey for intensive training on the products. Then I got home for 3 weeks, did more home study. Then I was sent away for 3 more weeks back to New Jersey. This was actually in 2001. This was actually during 9/11. I was in Cleveland for training during 9/11. Then I was sent home again for 3 weeks to shadow a rep who had been with the company for 5+ years. That's 12 weeks of training before they let me loose to go out on my own. 12 weeks, hours and hours and hours of training before I was even able to talk about the medication with the doctor. And I still didn't feel like I was totally prepared. I still remember this day going into my first sales call to talk to a doctor about medication. 24 years old. This doctor was 50+ years old, been around medicine for, 30 years. I felt completely and totally unequipped to even talk to this guy. Now, so think about the amount of training that we have in our professions, right? And we still, when we're on our first day, we still have that nervous Nelly feeling. We don't even really, I don't know, no matter what profession you're in, we don't really get our wheels underneath of us until like a year in. Even if you're an electrician, it takes a while to go from apprentice to journeyman. When we go about marriage, this is scary stuff, right, Kurt?
Mm-hmm.
When we go about marriage and parenting, you walk down the aisle, you say, I do, hug everybody on the way out. Oh, it's the best time of your whole life. You'll figure it out. Don't worry. You'll figure it out. Same thing with a kid. Don't worry. You'll figure it out. Holy crap. No wonder we all don't know what to do. And then you add in the emotion, right? These high stake emotional relationships with our wives and kids that are so important to us. And we wonder why sometimes it feels so great. And we wonder sometimes, why do I feel so lost? And I honestly think it has a lot to do with exactly what you just said, which is the skill. So can you give us a little bit more detail around what you felt was missing in the relationship? And by the way, I love you took ownership of everything with you, but just an overall broad view of like, this is the kind of things that we're missing now that you're on the other side of it.
Mine was being present in the moment and being attentive. Um, my mind, I think, was always somewhere else. Some of it has a lot to do with business and just my mind's always racing. I've never been diagnosed with ADHD or anything like that, but it's like my mind's always going in places. And so I have to really concentrate to make sure I'm present. But the thing of it is, she could talk to me and I wouldn't be listening. And some of that was acquired things I had purposely started to do because I felt she was nagging me or she was riding me or trying to tell me what to do. So I began to shut off and close off to her because she wasn't going to tell me what to do. She wasn't going to control me. So it's my mindset, the negative thoughts that I was having towards her, that I really began to realize I needed to do something about that because I'm headed down a bad road here. And the skills, I mean, I haven't even been here that long, Larry. And just the little things that I was able to pick up and implement and ask, okay, I've got this situation that I need to talk to my wife about. How should I approach this? And just the mentorship and the guidance that I got from the team and from the leaders made all the difference in the world in my confidence of being able to go to her with these situations. But a lot of it was, um, I think a great example would be just learning sometimes about being present in the date. One of the things that she noticed immensely is I said, okay, I'm going to be present in the moment. I'm going to ask inquisitive questions, inquiring questions. We would just usually talk business, but I didn't really try to ask questions that were intimate or to get to know her better or about her day. And so we went on a date night, and I got some suggestions from Jason, or excuse me, from Jake, as far as the questions to ask, to trying to create better communication. But I also determined I was going to be 100% present, and I wasn't going to be looking at my phone. So we sat down at the restaurant, and I noticed my phone was in an upright position. And that can distract me because if a text goes off, it lights up, whatever, I always want to look over at it. So I realized it was an upright position. And as I was talking to her and we were asking questions, I reached over with my left hand, just still keeping eye contact with her, took my phone gently and flipped it over upside down. She never looked down at my hand, but she saw me do it because she later told me she's noticed. And I just realized I have to do that to make sure I'm present with her at all moments. And the difference it made of her feeling heard, of me being present, being there in the moment, but also making her feel important, which I had not done for quite some time. Now, I thought I had because I'm an acts of service type guy. I'll make her coffee every morning. I'll do the dishes. I'll do all these little things that they say really wins a wife's heart. But when you're destroying it on the other end, as far as your other actions or lack thereof, that undermines everything you do. We talking about the emotional bank. We just did a series on that. I kept depleting the emotional bank. So all the good acts of service, the things I was doing, did not add up to the destruction that I was doing with the little things. And it was, it's those little things that spoil, but it's those little things that can make such a huge difference. As that I found, Larry, is that by me just implementing the small things that I felt I could wrap my head around, because I first came on saying, yeah, I need to work on my marriage. And then the marriage was going so bad that I finally switched to you and I said, Larry, I think I just need to concentrate on myself because my anxiety level is so high. I need to do what changes me, because no matter what happens in my relationship with my wife, I have to change. I have to get better. I have to grow. And I'm the only one that can do that for myself. And in doing that for myself, I truly believed that I could change the situation in my marriage. And I at least hoped I could. Now, I don't think that works that way for everybody, and maybe not as quickly as it did for me. And I commend my wife for that because of her openness and her quick reaction to forgive. Even though she had just, I think before I joined the Dad's Alliance, she says, I'm going to stop even talking or sharing with you. You don't listen, you don't hear me. I totally feel like I'm on my own here and that I'm just not heard no matter what I tell you. And even though she was telling me that, I was thinking I was hearing, but I wasn't implementing the practices that you guys teach so that she felt heard and that I truly was present. So I was hearing her. I wasn't thinking about the next comment I was going to make or my next response or the next, defensive argument. I was truly listening and then becoming empathetic and not necessarily agreeing with her.
Right.
Because she may say things that I don't agree with, but I could be empathetic, that I could letting her know I understand that she's feeling frustrated at this moment, and even just telling her, and it's not that you're necessarily looking for me to fix it, but I don't really know what to do at this point, but I just want you to know that I'm going to listen and I'm going to hear you and I'm here for you. Gosh, Larry, the differences it makes is, as you know, it's sometimes words cannot express the gratitude that I have. And I've never had a big dad or a men's group like this. The Band of Brothers makes a huge difference. One of the gentlemen, even this past week on one of the calls we were having, he commented about how he noticed how much my countenance had changed over the last 2 months.
I agree with that.
And I didn't even realize it. Now I was at a very, very low point. June 22nd, when I joined you, I was very, very low on self-confidence, self-esteem. I felt beat up. I felt I had been getting gaslighted big time. But a lot of it was my wife reacting to what I was doing or not doing. And when I changed that, her reaction changed. The gaslighting aspect went completely away once she felt heard, loved, appreciated, and that I was in the moment with her. And, just implementing the little steps that you guys teach along the way can make such a significant difference in your relationship. And, just speaking to the guys that are listening, there's hope for you guys. I don't know if you'll have the exact same outcome that I have had in my relationship, but the one thing you need to consider is you have to better yourself, because no matter what happens in the current relationship you're in, if you don't do something about the person you on today, you're going to end up in the same position. Because I was married for 2 weeks shy of 25 years in a first marriage. I was 11 years into this marriage and we were struggling. So I knew that there was one common denominator, and that was me. In both situations, either I was really bad at picking women, which I didn't think I was, or the common denominator was me, even though I thought I was a great guy, a really nice, loving, caring, hugging guy. I lacked so much in the areas that are so important to a woman, because women are so much different than we are. I hope that answered it.
Yeah, on steroids, it answered it, Kurt. You're being so authentic and so, vulnerable with everything that you were going through. I'd like to share something back with you that I think is that really, everything you just said, man, just really, really hit me in the heart. So I've been married to Jessica for 19 years. I would say the first half of our relationship was a bit of a shit show, just to be really honest. And a lot of it had to do with me. Jessica really came from this beautiful, functional family. Her parents have been married for 40 years. There's actually not one person in her entire family going back 4 or 5 generations that's ever been divorced. Not one. It's not even in her blood, right? She doesn't believe in it. And, when I first started, when we first got married, I went about the relationship. What is she doing? What is she not doing? I'm going to operate this way, and my hope is she's going to respond. I used to do, like, I look back on it now and I just shake my head, and I wonder, how in the world did this woman have patience for me sometimes? Yeah. So like, I would do things where, like, I would disconnect from her. I wouldn't truly listen to her. I had no idea what empathy was. She'd come to me venting about a problem. I would tell her how to fix it. She would get upset. Like, why are you telling me how to fix it? I just need you to listen. I'm like, well, why do you need me to listen? Why even come to me? I was an ass. Why even come to me in the first place? Like, let's talk about solutions. Like, let's fix this problem. She's like, that's not really what I need. Yeah, you do need that. Like, that's the way I would talk to her. And then she would get upset at me. And then I get pissed at her. I'm like, and I even remember my wife, this is like early rookie years in marriage, like first 5 years. I actually told my wife, if you don't want a solution to your problem, don't come and talk to me about it. I look back on that now, being like, holy crap, what were you thinking? The damage you were doing, because that's not how women are wired, right? That's how a man is wired. Like, Kurt, if I'm going to come to you, man, and talk about something that's ailing me, I'm not looking to vent. I'm looking for you to tell me what you think I should do. In fact, on the flip side, I'd probably be a little upset, be like, why didn't Kurt give me any advice? So that's how I went about marriage. I remember even like the love language thing. Like, my wife is big time acts of service and quality time. And those were the 2 things I was bad at. Like, I would not do these acts of service and quality time. I was a joke, man. I wouldn't be present. I would be distracted. I'd be on my phone, and not ask her generative questions like you're talking about, very good, deep questions that are going to generate better communication, intimacy, and connection. And then I'd wonder, like, why am I not getting laid? Like, that was my attitude. And then I'd get pissed at her for, why are we not having more sex? And she's like, and she would even tell me, she's like, I don't understand your mentality. She's like, you don't listen to me. Like, like, we're not really connecting at all. Like, in order for me to have sex with you, I really want to feel a connection to you. Like, she was aching for connection and I wasn't getting it. And it wasn't until I started learning these skills myself, and our relationship, we've been married 19 years. The past 6 years have been the best we've ever had. Past 2 years have been by far the best 2 years we've ever had. It's because I get it. And the person that changed in the relationship was me, even though I would look at her and blame her. It's her fault. And now, we have the best sex we've ever had. We have the most sex we've ever had. We have the most date nights we ever do. We have the deepest conversations we've ever had. This was the scariest thing. And so I feel you on like the divorce thing and the relationship kind of crumbling. My wife and I went out on a date. I think it's probably like the beginning of the year at this point. And we were celebrating, I think it might have been like Valentine's Day or something like that. And Dad Edge was obviously doing really, really well. And I just asked her, and this is what scared me, Kurt. A woman who has never, in 4 or 5 generations deep, not one person in her family has been divorced. And I've never heard my wife say the D word. I asked her, where do you think our marriage would be without Dad Edge? And I just was like, kind of like smiling, kind of like, even like a little giddy, like, where do you think it'd be? And she didn't hesitate. Divorced. And I was like, what? Like, I was stunned. I was like, are you serious? And she's like, and my wife doesn't say anything she doesn't mean. And she goes, well, that might be a bit of a stretch. She goes, but I was kind of planning for a life without you. And I was like, are you serious? And she's like, kind of. Yeah, I was. And I was like, well, tell me more about that. She's like, well, you weren't the guy that I knew you could be. And the longer we were married, the more it was revealing to me that you were never going to become the man that I knew you could become. I didn't have a lot of hope the longer we were married. And then when you started Dad Edge and I started seeing changes and I started seeing ways that we were evolving as a couple, suddenly I fell back in love with you again. Dude, I never knew that. I had no idea that my wife kind of emotionally was prepping for a life without me. And that, dude, I literally, I think in my heart, I was like, thank God. Like, thank God. Thank you, Jesus. Right. Because had I not done this work too, I'd have 2 boys instead of 4. I would have 2 boys that probably wouldn't want much to do with me. I'd probably be on my second or third marriage at this point. I'd be a disaster. So I feel you on that one. And I love the fact that you and we staked a flag in the ground and said, I'm not going to be concerned with what she does. I'm going to be concerned with what I do, because that's all I can truly control at the end of the day. And if I don't do this, then there's really no hope. Right. So I love the fact you said that so bluntly and boldly. I want to get to some specifics though. You've only been in that edge for 3 months, but you have pressed the gas faster than a lot of men who have come and done life with us. And that's not to say that, men are better than others, but you've really encapsulated everything that we do. And you've done very specific things in your relationship. What specific things have paid the most dividends for you and your wife?
Wow. That's a tough one. I'm just the kind of person, I'm all in once I'm in. And
Yeah.
I needed a change. I had to make it. And I had to make sure that as I was going through this process, I think probably one of the biggest ones is understanding that if I'm doing this, I'm doing it for me, and I'm not doing it for how she's going to respond to me.
Yeah. Oh,
Because we as men so much want to keep score and think we've earned it. And so we held out for 3 weeks, man. We done everything that we've been told to do. And they said, and the wife's not responding the way we think, and she's not responding in the bedroom yet. And so, and I'm finding through the Dad's Edge that varies in every relationship, because the damage is deeper, just like in your situation. It just depends on where you're at and where the emotions of both parties are. But probably one of the that to me was a big influence of doing it without keeping in score, because I'd always done that before. I'd done the acts of service, felt I had earned the right to the bedroom or to her treating me nicer. I truly believed, and she kind of verbally expressed, she blamed me for everything, literally. The stress in her life being the way it was. And whether that was accurate, that isn't what matters. It's how it was viewed and perceived by how with my behavior. So, it may sound like I'm trying to take 100% of the blame. There's always plenty of blame to go around, but there's only one thing, is that you can personally take responsibility for yourself. But the change, I think, to get back to your question, it's kind of a repeat, but it was the empathy and listening to her was my biggest drawbacks, I believe, because after seeing this, I also see what caused a lot of the issues in my previous marriage, with the insecurities that my previous wife had. That even though I was this loving, caring guy, I responded completely wrong because I didn't have empathy. I always wanted to solve the problem. I was a project manager, so my whole job was always solving problems and seeing them before they happened and trying to avoid them. And so I had kind of a negative mindset a lot of times. But I don't know if I'm really directly answering your question well. Do you want to kind of rephrase that a little bit, see if I can kind of pick back up where you're going with that, Larry?
No, so I think, well, first of all, let me explain to the audience why these two skill sets are so powerful: active listening and empathy. And here's the powerful thing that, and Kurt, you probably know this already, but maybe if as I say it, you'll be like, oh yeah, that's true. The more empathetic we are, and the more we look to, one of the skills we teach is how to label your wife's emotional state. Like, wow, if you come home and your wife just hits you with a barrage of like what happened to her that day, and she's just in a bit of she's crumbling a little bit. All you really have to do to make her feel, which by the way, 3 basic needs that she has: seen, heard, and safe.
Yeah.
Seen, heard, and safe, is to label what it is you think she's feeling, which is empathy, which is, and sometimes it looks like this: wow, that's overwhelming. Who wouldn't be overwhelmed? Tell me more about that. Sometimes here's the other thing too. Sometimes we don't even know what to say. Like our brains are racing. Oh my God, what do I say? What do I say? What do I say? What do I say? Kurt, one of the most powerful things that I've seen myself and other men say is, wow, I don't even know what to say to that right now, but I'm so glad you told me. Like, dude, my wife has crumbled and cried, and that's all I've said. And she'll just hug me and say, thank you. Just thank you for listening. And I'm like, shouldn't I be solving it? Like, even my male brain,
That's too
right?
easy.
Even my male brain, I'm like, shouldn't I be doing something more here? But that's all they need, and we try to overcomplicate it, or we try to talk to her like a dude. And empathy is not sympathy. I'm so sorry that happened to you today. Pat you on the back, right? That doesn't feel good to people. And if you don't know what sympathy is, when somebody dies, a friend of yours' parent dies, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That's sympathy. Empathy is like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to say. I'm so glad you told me. It must feel so overwhelming. How can I best support you right now? What feels right to you? That's empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And you're also right. Empathy is not always agreement. My 6-year-old was losing his mind last night, temper tantrum, because I hurt his feelings because I told him to clean his room. And I told him he had 7 minutes to do it or he was going to lose his tablet the next day. And because his room is always a disaster. I knew he could do it. I set him up for a win, but he was crying while he was doing it. And I was like, buddy, what's wrong? You hurt my feelings. Yeah, I probably did. Daddy probably spoke in a tone that maybe hurt your feelings, and that probably hurt your heart. Yeah, it did. Yeah, I probably did. I'm sorry. I probably shouldn't have spoken to you like that, but great job cleaning your room. But here's the thing is when you're empathetic, when you're looking for the emotion, one of the byproducts of that is it makes you a better listener because you're intently listening to the words. You're watching her body language. You're looking for voice tone because you're looking to label that emotion through empathy. So it's making you a better listener because like, what is she feeling? What's going on here? What's her voice sound like? What words is she using? Versus like, yeah, it sounds tough. How about we do this to fix that? Right. So I just wanted to clarify that. But I think to answer your request of like, is there something, there have been things that your wife has told you, you've mentioned it in the mastermind sessions, that you've done specifically that have like really moved the needle for her? And I think you've even talked about just your level of intimacy has skyrocketed, your level of closeness and connection has skyrocketed. Um, so much so that, your relationship, and I'm not going to say anything outside of what you don't want to talk about, is about ready to go to a whole new level of just beautiful things that are about to happen. But we're not gonna share that on the podcast. But there are certain things that have been done that have really moved that needle that she's, I think, even told you.
Yeah. Um, in case my sons and son-in-law ever listen to this, I don't want to go into too much detail, but for the protection there. But day and night, absolute day and night in the intimacy realm. And it's because she feels safe, she feels heard. Um, one of the little things I did, I went home to spend a couple of weeks with my family while I was still in recovery, and just felt I needed time with my family to kind of re-energize. And I wasn't working. And when I did, I decided, okay, I'm going to implement one of the strategies you guys have talked about, and that is leave little post-it notes, love notes. And so when I did probably 20 of them, and I hid them in the coffee cups stacked in the cabinets. I put them in the checkbooks. I put them in her books that she's reading a chapter later, knowing that she would get to that the following week before she went to her Wednesday meeting.
Gold.
Putting in her in her vanity, putting in her desk drawer. Just I put it inside her. I put them in Ziploc bags because I knew she'd freak out if I put a piece of paper inside her protein shake and her coffee stuff and her collagen. So I put post-it notes in Ziploc bags and stuck them inside there. So when she would open them and open it up, inside would be a love letter inside her protein shake or inside her collagen or, and then just putting in little notes everywhere. And wow, as she was getting them, she was texting them to me. And with them came some incredible love notes and pictures that came along with those too, that would just mind-boggling and took us to a whole new level in our relationship. But it's because I was finally showing steps that I truly cared. And she knew that I was really dedicated to this, because I did involve her in the decision of coming on board with the Dad's Edge, just because I felt it would be difficult to make any kind of financial commitment without involving her. But just a complete turnaround of everything. And one of the things when you're talking that really jumped out to me is, I think where men miss it a lot is you were asking her, most of the time it would have ended where, yeah, see, it's divorce. I would have been like, wow, man, that's kind of extreme, but man, I didn't think of that. But instead you said, wow, tell me more. How often do we as husbands say, tell me more? Because a lot of times we don't want to know more because we don't know what to do with it.
Right.
We really don't. So sometimes I didn't want to ask because I was not wanting to go down that rabbit hole because I knew where it would probably lead if I asked more questions. But if you're brave enough and confident enough to do it, and I wasn't that way right in the very beginning. It took me a few weeks to actually get any type of level of confidence or self-esteem or felt that I was making the headway. And if you're noticing that I sometimes stumble over my words, that is part of the stroke. I still deal with that a little bit. So I don't know if you can edit them all out, but it's just the nature of the beast. But just a tremendous difference with the interaction between the two of us. And like you say, the mastermind groups are very instrumental because I can be on 3 of those a week if I want. And I get on a lot of them just to listen into the issues other men are running into, because every session I walk away and I'm telling you what, I feel energized. I feel more excited. I feel more confident. And I feel like I've walked away with something that I can now implement in my marriage, which excites me because it adds more fuel. Because one of the things that I'm finding that I'm at this stage now is things are so much better in the relationship now that now I have to make sure that I'm concentrating on not falling back into the old Kurt, to the old ways of doing things, because it's doing better now. So I could ease and back off. So without the mastermind group, without the alliance, I know that I would fall back into the same Kurt because I know the hamster wheel I was on before. And this helps to hold me accountable, but it also helps to keep me encouraged as I'm going along as far as what are my next steps? How do I stay accountable? What do I need to do to keep this thing going in the direction that it's already headed without having a deep setback? Now, we've had some ups and downs. Yesterday, I had to apologize to her. Went out to the grill and I came back in and I said, hey, I want to tell you, I'm sorry for responding the way that I did. I was very short on my patience and I'm sorry. And she said, thanks for saying that. You were. I was too. Doesn't excuse it, but yes, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the past, I always just be real short, real kind of cut and dry, and just cut her off. And it's not necessarily my nature to do it that way, but I had become that way with her, where I was just very short.
Yeah.
Very, very curt, to be frank with you.
Very, very curt.
Yeah, I was very curt with her. The literal meaning of it.
I got to tell you, man. So the things that you really hit on this podcast, I actually took notes. I like the posted notes, but this is one of the reasons I love doing the podcast is because it's a front row seat to an invaluable education. And I literally wrote down, I was like, post a note in the protein shake with a Ziploc. Because my wife does the same thing. She does a protein shake. Everyone's like, I haven't thought of that. I'm gonna write that down. Because I think for my wife to find something like that would be super cool. I never thought about doing it in the coffee cup. Like I'm always like this creature of habit sometimes. Like I always put it on her mirror. And sometimes I'll put it like on our dashboard, but like I need these new creative ideas, too. Mm-hmm. So you gave me an arsenal of them. The other thing too is when we are, I want to make sure men really heard you say the point about the apology, right? Ownership is contagious. It truly is. So if there is wrongdoing, and if you don't take my word for it, go to YouTube and just type in Jocko Willink marriage advice. It's fascinating. I've never done that before, but I was just sort of on YouTube and I was looking for marriage advice. And I think I actually just typed in marriage advice and Jocko, a 2.5-minute YouTube clip popped up from Jocko. And I was like, Jocko Willink on marriage. And he's been a guest before. And one of the things that Jocko talks about, this guy, he's at a speaking event, guy raises his hand, says, what advice do you have for marriage as it relates to what you teach in extreme ownership? And the first part of the 2-minute spiel was about how to help your wife become more emotionally independent without you. That was number one. I thought that's where he was going. And he did. But the second part is extreme ownership. If you've done a wrongdoing of any kind, whatever, own it. Own it to your core being of who you are. Extreme ownership is sometimes the apology and the wrongdoing that you did to your wife. And he's even explained, he goes, many people think, well, if I say I'm sorry for the wrongdoing or declare ownership around it, I'm drawing more attention to it, which is I will get attacked more. He's like, it's actually the opposite. You earn more credibility and the chances of you perhaps even getting an apology back or some type of ownership back is high. You just gave the example of that, of what you did and then her response and how crucial that is. Yeah.
Yeah. Her argument would be that I would come back with a defensive argument.
Yep.
I wouldn't take ownership of when I did something wrong. So now just apologizing and you can do it without being emasculated. That's the great thing about the Dad's Alliance. You guys do such a great job of showing men how to take those steps without making them feel like they're emasculating themselves or they're losing their cojones, where you can still come across in a confident, positive way, but that you're not being this wimp or you're being this doormat, because you're not. It actually becomes more attractive to your wife. And you gave a beautiful example in one of the masterminds about how that came about in your situation in your marriage. And that really resonated with me on how I could approach that with Kim.
I'm loving this podcast because you're right. Men are very extreme in nature. So if I'm extreme ownership, that means I'm a doormat. Some guys will take it that way. Like, or I have to allow her to walk all over me. No, Absolutely not. There's a way to apologize and take ownership and do it in an empowering way, not in a feminine, sobbing, and quite frankly, I can't think of a better word, but gross way of like, yeah, I'm just your doormat. Like, just walk all over me. Do whatever you want. No, 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 no. That is not how that relationship works. How you make a relationship work and how you have mutual respect is own the things that you did, right? And also don't allow somebody to treat you a certain way. And one quick example of that is for 19 years, thank God, Jessica and I have had these rules of engagement with each other, meaning we have guardrails in our relationship that we do not cross. We've never crossed. One, never ever no name calling whatsoever. I've never called my wife a bitch. She's never called me an asshole. Nothing ever, no matter how angry we are at each other. Another guardrail, if we are in a disagreement or an argument, we speak exactly in the same voice tone that I'm talking right now. We do not yell at each other. The other thing is this: we do not bring up previous wrongdoings to go for what we call the jugular. Going for the jugular is like, oh, you remember that thing you did to me 10 years ago? Yeah, how about that? We never do that. If it's in the past, it's in the past, right? Now, those are the guardrails. And luckily, thank God, we've never crossed the guardrails. But if we did, I guarantee the other person would be like, that's a guardrail. That's a rule of engagement in our relationship we don't cross. And I don't appreciate that. And that will not be stood for. Right. And I expect her to talk to me like that. And I would talk to her like that. This is something we agreed on, right? We've never had to do that. But I think as long as you have the guardrails in your relationship, and you're very upfront about your boundaries. Like, hey, these are deal breakers for me. You don't treat me disrespectfully. And I think a lot of guys think, well, if I'm learning these skills, then I'm a doormat. And I think you've emulated that example beautifully that it's not.
Well, and a great example of that, just to be real quick and brief, is you guys talked about those boundaries. And so my wife is big on boundaries too. She reads the boundaries books and stuff like that. But she was just blowing up and kind of going crazy in one of the conversations we were having. I think it was over finances or something. And it just kind of got out of control in the past. I've just kind of gotten short and I get worked up and all that. I finally stopped and I said, okay, we're going to call a timeout here. I said, number one, I want you to know that the way you're speaking to me right now is unacceptable and it's not going to be allowed any longer. So here's what I'm going to need to do. Let's take a break for an hour and we'll come back to this. And I'm going to take a break and I'm going to go clear my head. It'll give you an opportunity to clear yours. I'm going to go walk the dog. And she says, well, I'm not going to be here when you get back because I'm not going to stay working late doing all this and that. And she was still well fired up. And I said, I understand. That's fine. Then let's just schedule it tomorrow morning after my dad's edge meeting. We'll get together at 10 o'clock. And she said, okay, well, I come back from walking the dog. She goes, okay, well, I finished this. I'm ready to go over this. And I said, nope. I said, we agreed that we are going to do it tomorrow morning. So we'll do it tomorrow morning. It's late. It's tired. It's not going to be a good time to do it.
Yeah.
So we're going to address this tomorrow morning. And I tell you what, it just calmed her and relaxed her. She thanked me later for doing that because it actually, rather than her being willing to come back to it again and crossing that boundary, I know it probably went down a road that was still too intense, but it gave time.
Yeah.
And it set a boundary and let her know, hey, I'm not going to allow this I'm not going to treat you like this, but I'm also not going to allow it myself. But I did it in a calm, loving, confident manner, not in an arrogant, pompous manner or with anger in my voice. And so it was received in a loving, kind way rather than in a derogatory, negative way. So, and that's what I learned that from the dad's edge because we were going to have some intense conversations. And I asked, how do I handle these kind of situations? Because every time I do, it blows up. Here's how it's going to go. Here's what's going to do. And you guys coached me through the fact of don't perceive how it's going to go, but rather how do you want it to go? And you can choose your words to direct the conversation. And that is probably the one of the biggest impacts that I've had here is how you guys are teaching me to choose my words, how to not do the you, but how I can say, what's going on, how I'm perceiving this or how I'm kind of picturing this in my mind. So I'm taking accountability for my own thoughts without throwing the blame on her or putting her on the defense. So a lot of it is, and I'm still trying to learn these skills, the experience cube and all that, which a lot of people go, what all is this stuff? But these are things that are taught in the Alliance group that are game changers. And even though I'm not very good at it, I'm horrible at the experience cube. Each time I'm running into a big situation, I practice, I think it through, and I screw it up pretty bad, but she doesn't know it. So it comes across to her as being great, even though I know I screwed it up. And it's made a huge difference. Huge difference. I mean, I just can't believe how quickly it has changed for us.
Well, see, here's what I think we laid out in this podcast very beautifully through examples. Is we talked about, if you didn't go to training to be an electrician, if you're not an apprentice or a journeyman, there are skills that are associated with the black wires, the red wires, the wiring, all that stuff, right? Everything you just talked about, right, that we talked about in this show: tactical empathy, labeling, listening, mirroring, inviting. Instead of using the word why, we didn't say that specifically, but instead of using the word, why do you feel that way? Tell me more. The tell me more is an invite. The why feels accusatory. Generative questions to elevate the connection, the intimacy, and the communication in your relationship. You mentioned the experience cube. We teach that as well. That's a way to have a conversation that would otherwise be extremely triggered. The other thing too, Kurt, that was very unexpected for me in this podcast that really emerged out of this: you're leading yourself and her extremely well. And the last example that you shared was, we agreed that we were going to talk about this tomorrow. We all know that conversations that could otherwise go fairly well could go bad if they're at the wrong time of the day. When you're exhausted, willpower is at the lowest, it's late at night, an easy conversation can turn into a fight very easily. We agreed we're going to talk about this tomorrow morning, and then she confirmed that. Like, I'm so glad you said that, like, because it could have gone the other direction. You're leading her, right? Which makes her feel safe. So I have thoroughly enjoyed this podcast, my man. Now obviously you've given us a lot of examples in the mastermind sessions and all that, but I love how granular we got on this podcast and the examples. And now I understand why your relationship is flourishing, from a more granular level. And I think what you've done here is really serve the audience in a profound way. So thank you so much for coming on, man.
Thank you, Larry. I appreciate it very much. And I don't even know how to, you're naming the terminology of all these strategies or things that you implement or teach. I don't even know what those are called. All I know is what you're teaching me how to do them. So that's what I'm telling the guys. You're hearing them going about the experience cube and all these other things. You don't have to know the inner workings. You just have to know what you need to do to make it happen.
Yeah.
I don't even know these terminologies, but yet I'm implementing it. So
Like
one of these
karate,
days I'll learn.
like Karate Kid, where he's painting the fence,
Yeah,
painting the house,
yeah,
wax on,
yeah.
wax off. He's actually teaching him to fight.
That's what you've been doing.
Yeah, we Miyagi the guys. So it's,
Yeah,
you got to, if you're gonna fight in life, right? You're gonna fight for your marriage. You gotta know the skills. You gotta know how to paint the fence. You gotta know how to wax the cars on and off, right?
that's right.
Kurt, thank you so much for coming on, gentlemen. Listen, I'm gonna have a very distinct free resource for you guys in the show notes in this particular show, because I think it's really, really appropriate based on what Kurt emulated here, and that is 25 intimate conversation starters. It's a total free resource. It's a video training on one of the skills that we talked about today, which is the skill of asking generative questions. And I explain that in a quick video tutorial of what generative questions are, why psychologically they land so well for your wife, why it's going to elevate the connection, the intimacy, why you're going to feel like you're dating again. And I give you a PDF of 25 generative questions that are intimate conversation starters where you're going to feel like you're dating your wife again. You can find all that at thedadedge.com/Friday73. We'll also have Kurt's information in there too, if you want to get in touch with him. Again, thedadedge.com/Friday73. Kurt, this was awesome. This was awesome. I really loved it. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Larry. I really, really enjoyed it. And I hope it makes an impact in a lot of men's lives.
Me
Really
too.
do.